Greetings, I'm Keith Klein, the host of the VentureFizz podcast, where I interview the most fascinating people in the tech scene. This is episode 343, and today's guest is Jonathan Corbin, co-founder and CEO of Maven AGI, and our first sponsored podcast episode. Yes, please welcome Silicon Valley Bank as a supporter of the VentureFizz podcast. More on SVB in a bit. Anytime I see a funding announcement for a new company, I get excited as I'm an optimist and I hope that every company will scale and reach great milestones. But when I saw the news about Maven and how they're using generative AI for enterprise customer experience, it was just very different. It was a no-brainer moment, and I'm calling it now. This is going to be an anchor company in the Boston tech scene. Why, you might ask? Well, there's three reasons. One, the team. They have a world-class team from HubSpot, Google, Meta, Amazon, and Stripe. Take Jonathan, for example. He was the global VP of Customer Success and Strategy at HubSpot, where he led a team that was responsible for over 200,000 customers. Prior to that, he held leadership roles with major tech companies like Sprinklr, Marketo, Adobe, and others. He is one example of a team that is uniquely qualified to solve this problem. Two, the problem. The use case for generative AI at Maven just makes a world of sense, and they already have early customers with amazing results, which he gets into during our discussion. Third, backing. In May, Maven announced that it had raised $28 million from investors like M13, Lux Capital, E14 Fund, Mentors Fund, and 786 Ventures, with participation from executives from OpenAI, Google, HubSpot, and Stripe. Maven is absolutely a company to keep an eye on, and one of the key companies that are part of the next wave in the Boston tech scene. In this episode of our podcast, we cover lots of great topics, like what the fundraising process looked like for Maven, Jonathan's background story, and a journey through his career path, plus his early entrepreneurial roots as a kid, how he learned to lead a global organization of over 1,000 team members at HubSpot, what led Jonathan and his two co-founders, Eugene Mann and Sami Chalabi, down the path of starting Maven, all the details about Maven and the velocity that they have been operating under in terms of building the platform and getting early customer adoption, advice for startups on building out a customer success function, the vibe for the AI startup community in the Boston tech scene, and so much more. Okay, before we get into the podcast episode with Jonathan, here is a brief word from our podcast sponsor, SVB. I'm excited to share that this podcast is brought to you by one of the strongest longtime supporters of the local startup ecosystem, that being Silicon Valley Bank, a division of First Citizens Bank. SVB serves innovative tech, healthcare, and life sciences companies, including 80% of CNBC's Disruptor 50 list, 72% of Forbes Cloud 100 list, and 48% of Forbes AI 50 list companies. With more than 1,500 bankers and relationship advisors and $40 billion in loans as of Q1 2024, SVB delivers the right people, service, and resources to support your entire financial journey. Learn more at svb.com. All right, without further ado, here's my interview with Jonathan. Jonathan, thanks so much for joining us.
It's good to be here, Keith. It's been a few years since we chatted, so it's good to see you again. I appreciate the invite.
Well, I do want to highlight that fact. So I was just curious. I'm like, when did we originally connect? And I had a message in LinkedIn from 2010, and I launched VentureFizz in 2009. So I consider you like an OG VentureFizz user, right? You were like, this is a great platform. Like, you gave me some great kudos in the early days, and I'm like, this is amazing. Thanks, Jonathan. And I think we caught up live, and it was awesome. So
Yeah,
fast forward, almost 15 years later, I'm excited to have you as a guest on this podcast, because when I saw what you were building, I was like, yes, it's just one of those, like, this makes sense. Yes, this
yeah.
is such a great use case for AI. So before we get into what you're building with Maven AGI, I did want to talk about kind of the fundraising process, right? There's a lot of founders out there that are trying to raise capital, and it's been a challenge for some.
Yep.
Yet I hear when I talk to some VCs, some of the more competitive, legit AI deals are really hard, right? Like those founders are experiencing a different set of circumstances where there's a lot of VCs competing for, writing hopefully a check. So what has your experience been in this fundraising climate?
Yeah, my experience may not be kind of typical, but I think for us it was we saw a massive opportunity to go after a space that we were very familiar with. I was fortunate to have two very experienced co-founders who'd started companies before, who worked at great companies like Google and Stripe. And so when the three of us saw the opportunity, like tangential to the areas that we were familiar with and the things that we were working on, we said this is something we want to do. And so we were able to raise our seed round very quickly. Um, we really didn't run any process or anything like that. And so I think it happened in a couple of days. And so, for us, we said, here's how we want to approach it. Here's the things that we're going to go after. Here are the different things we're going to focus on at each stage of the company. So we're very deliberate in terms of what we wanted to achieve at each stage of growth, how we were going to do that, and what was required in order for us to exit that stage. So that was particularly helpful for us in terms of going through the process. And we found some amazing partners, so Lux, I think, they saw the opportunity where the application of generative AI to existing workflows is something that was going to fundamentally change the way that people did things. The other is E14, which is a MIT Media Fund VC fund. And they engaged with us very early on and said, "Well, we love what you're doing. We like your team. We're excited to work with you." So our situation was probably a little atypical in terms of like just having some people who'd gone through the founding journey before, people who had some a really nice match of skills. So my founders came from the product side and from the engineering side. I was on the go-to-market side, and so I think that was particularly helpful. So great idea, great application of technology to solving something with a relatively large TAM. The TAM for support alone is $520 billion. And then a great founding team that was complementary. So if you're looking for like, how do you help yourself in the funding process? I think those are areas that VCs are looking at.
Well, and I think it's a testament to investors back great teams. Like ideas, yes, there's amazing ideas out there, but if you don't have the team to execute on it, they're probably not going to place their bet on that team to execute on that idea unless they're uniquely qualified to solve this massive problem, which, like you said, the founding team that you have is incredibly qualified to do what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's, I look at, kind of my history, right? So, I was most recently at HubSpot leading the global CS organization. Before that, I was at Sprinklr pre-IPO. I was at Marketo, during the acquisition. I was at Adobe for 5 years. And so I spent a lot of time in the CX space. I think Brian Halligan made the joke when I was interviewing at HubSpot. He's like, I think we're the only CX company you haven't worked at, which was kind of funny. But from an industry perspective, I came from that industry, and then kind of looking at my founders, Eugene was working on how do we improve the Stripe support experience, leading the applied ML team there, and then Sammy had built one of the largest personalization engines in the world with Google News. So Sammy led the engineering and the product teams for that. There's a billion users. There's very few people that are building personalization engines that are running a billion users. So incredible founders, I think is really helpful for us too.
All right. Well, we're going to dig more into your career as well as more of what you guys are building. But let's rewind the clock. So, where did you grow up? What were you like as a child?
Yeah, I grew up in Boston, and I was pretty entrepreneurial as a child. I remember, I would go out and, I lived not too far from the beach, and you'd go out there and you'd see folks on the beach, and it's like, oh, hey, there's something missing here. They don't have sunglasses. So I went off and found a way to get sunglasses wholesale. And I don't know, I was like 10 years old, like with the box of 20 sunglasses I got for like $2 each at a flea market, like selling them for 20 bucks. And so I was very entrepreneurial as a kid. I looked for opportunities where there was like a way for me to make some money. And so I was like, trying to do whatever I could in order to close the gap and maybe make a few dollars along the way.
Well, I love that young entrepreneurial hustle of figuring out your ideal customer profile. If somebody's like squinting and outside at the beach and they don't, it's like there's a demand right there,
There's
and
obvious
you knew
demand and there's a need to be
obvious
filled.
demand,
Yeah.
and you figured out what can I do like gr very large gross margins, right? Like if there's pain, there's going to be a sale, and you can obviously get a nice margin out of it. So.
Yeah, yeah. It was funny, Keith, because growing up, my mother was like, there's two things you don't want to do, and one of those is sales. And then eventually, at some point in your career, you're like, I was selling, sunglasses on the beach at 8 years old. So,
Mhm.
everyone is always selling something.
Exactly. All right. So, what did you study in college?
I had a double major in management science and information systems and operations management. And so, I learned the fun things like learning how to code, how to create systems, and then, how do you use math to optimize processes? And so, those are some of the things that I studied in school. Uh, Really useful, actually, in terms of like, applying them to what I ended up doing. I ended up spending a little bit of time as a coder, like, as a software engineer writing code at a company called Sybase. But then as I look at other things that I ended up doing at different points throughout my career, there's a lot of like process improvement, optimization, and things like that. How do we create better experiences? How do we better utilize resources? And so it's the degree that I had in undergrad is certainly something that I used throughout my career. And then, of course, I did my MBA at Babson. It's known for their entrepreneurship program.
Well, you gave a highlight as far as your career and the different positions you held, like at HubSpot, but let's take it kind of like a walk through because Sybase was an early database, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of cut your teeth there. And then you went to Unica, which talk about like OG of marketing automation software, right? Like that was a big company. They went public and they were acquired
They
by
went
IBM. And
public. Yeah. Yeah. It's actually a really, really funny story because I remember going there and I met with them, I chatted with them, and they were like, hey, this is the things that we're doing. We're one of the first companies to think about kind of the full stack from a marketing perspective. And during the interview process, I was thinking about like, what am I going to tell my parents that I do if I come to work here? And it's like, they're like, okay, you write code for databases and whatever. They understood that. And they're like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to tell them, the spam you get in the mail? That's from me. And like, yeah, okay, got it. I understand what you do now. So we also did direct mail. We did, email. We did a bunch of things at Unica. And so I like to joke that that was the beginning of my love affair with customer experience management programs.
all right, so then your career continued to progress. You eventually landed at Omniture, and which was acquired by Adobe. So what
Yeah.
were you working on there?
So I started off as an account manager. I was, working with large accounts. How do you do a better job of utilizing digital technology, digital analysts to improve your engagements and your customer interactions? So I got to work with some amazing accounts. I think, some local ones in Boston were like Fidelity, Liberty Mutual, Staples. And so got to spend a lot of time with them, going deep into understanding what they were doing, how they were doing it, and got to meet a lot of folks that are local to the community in Boston. And so, I went from, being on this like strategic accounts team at Omniture, and of course we got acquired by Adobe to managing that team. And then that was the eastern half of the US, Latin America, and Canada. And then as we continued to grow at Adobe, towards the end of my career, we started going into verticals. And so I got the opportunity to kind of hang out in the fintech space, so financial service and insurance vertical, and to help start that vertical up. And so that was a really great experience of, how do we go deep in terms of helping people to understand the vernacular, the challenges that people in that space are having, and how do we do a better job of, helping them as they continue through improving the programs that they had in place to acquire customers and engage with customers and deliver a better experience.
And that looks like you had your own entrepreneurial pursuit. A
Yeah,
Veer
yeah, I
was the name of the
did.
company. So what was
Veer,
that?
yeah. Veer was great. That was, I think, 2015, somewhere around there. And For us, we said, hey, it's a big problem that we can go off and solve. And so after working for a bunch of, companies in the customer experience space, I was like, man, Yu Chen, I looked up to him as an entrepreneur starting Unica, and Josh James had started Omniture. And I was like, man, like the impact that he's had of like having this vision for creating this software and how it's going to impact customer experience and the companies that are using it was really cool. And I saw it firsthand because I was working with those customers. I said it'd be really cool to be able to have that kind of impact. And so myself and a partner started something called Veer, where we understood destination intent for the end users of a parking app. And so we said, okay, great, parking is a problem wherever you go in Boston or anywhere in the world. And how do we create a better experience for people? And so, people downloaded and used our app many, many times. And I remember the feeling of the first time someone I didn't know downloaded the app and used it. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is pretty amazing. It's like such a euphoric feeling. of like, hey, I imagine a different world. Someone's downloading it, someone's using it, they're getting value out of it. And so we ended up moving on from that, I think, toward the end of 2015. And then I joined Marketo. Um, and so that was a really fun experience, great crew of people that I got a chance to work with. Big Purple was, just building a great brand. Marketers love using the technology. And then I was there for a little over a year, and then we ended up getting bought by Vista Equity Partners, who, of course, ended up selling that to Adobe.
Got it.
And
Okay.
I don't know if all the roads lead to Adobe, Keith, but that one
Right.
certainly did.
All right. So then, where was the business at when you joined Sprinkler?
Sprinkler was about 100 million, 130 million in revenue. Um, and they were very much, in a phase of evolution, I think is probably the best way to put it. They raised some money, weren't hitting expectations, had to go in there and work with them on some tough decisions that they had to make. But the outcome was that we were able to build a great team. We were able to build a product that I think showed a lot of promise in terms of allowing people to use social to engage with customers and prospect. And then, of course, they had an IPO a couple of years ago, which was an awesome outcome for them.
All right. So you already gave the highlight that you spent, some great years at HubSpot. So what was your role there? And talk about like the progression, because obviously this was during years of very aggressive growth for the company.
Oh man, and you know what? Growth is addictive, Keith. And so, once you're in an environment like that, you're like, how do I sustain that? So when I joined, it was 2019, and we're about 700 million revenue, 70,000 customers. And my team, I think, was about 238 people. And so over the next 4 years, we grew as a company to about 7,700 people, 200,000 customers, 3.5 million premium customers, and like amazing statistics, and obviously a testament to the vision that Brian and Dharmesh had in terms of building it. But um, my team ballooned to about 1,000 people, and I was responsible for the global CS organization. And so there are a number of teams that I kind of consolidated into three main ones. So we had the CS organization, we had the partner success organization, and then we had the renewals team. And so we were responsible for retaining and growing our customers, making sure that they were getting value out of HubSpot products they purchased. And I think there's like some places that you go to work, Keith, where it's like people are so passionate about the customers they work with, making sure that people are getting value out of it. I'm a huge fan of what Brian and Dharmesh, and of course Yamini's leading the team there now, have built in terms of creating a culture where people actually care about the customers they're working with. And that customer first mentality is one that, as I was starting our Maven, we said, no, how do we emulate that type of approach? Making sure that, customers are at the center of everything we do.
Well, and I wonder if that stems from the early days of Dharmesh and Brian being so hyper focused on building a great culture for the employees in general, right? That translates into that caring of customers. When you start that early on and building that into the DNA, it definitely pays off long term.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, as we were going through starting Maven, the three of us said, hey, what are the things that, we carried with us from the other companies we were part of? And I think that, there were a few things that really stood out in terms of my journey. One was in Adobe, we very much had a very caring culture, one where people were passionate about the people they worked with and treating each other fairly. But it was also very focused on like performance. And so I appreciated that. I think it's something that, it helps people to understand you're surrounded by high performers and you have high expectations for each other. The other was, HubSpot, where, there was really a deep level of appreciation for the customers who were using our products, and making sure that they were getting the value that they expected from it, that they were using it and doing the right things for them. Even when you might question whether the customer was right or not, it was always focused on making sure you're doing the right thing for them.
Yeah. Okay, so you talked about your career progression, which, it's like you worked up this, ladder, for lack of a better term, to leading a global organization of 1,000 people servicing 200,000 customers. How did you learn how to lead an organization of that size and magnitude?
I think what's interesting, as a leader, you're responsible for, of course, the entire organization, but it starts with the folks that you're surrounding yourself with and your leadership team. How are you interacting with them? What are the expectations that you're setting for each other? And how are we holding ourselves accountable? And so I think there's like three main kind of pieces to being a leader that are really important. The first is like setting, goals for the team, making sure that everyone understands what the target is that you're trying to achieve. It sounds obvious, right? But it's like it doesn't always happen. And if that's your target, then it really influences your decision making. If you say, "Hey, our target is like X number or X amount of revenue," then you say, "Okay, great. If that is the target, then that should influence everything that we do." And the lens that we view every decision we make is, does this get me closer to my target? And it really helps from a prioritization exercise. The second thing is that like you need to provide your team with the tools they need in order to do their job. So you're setting out like, hey, we want to go we want to go to Antarctica. You need to make sure they have the jackets and like the bobsleds and all that other fun stuff you need in order to get there. Um, the third thing is like, you have to make sure they have the training on how to use those tools. And if you've like done those three things, like that is your job as a leader. And I think it's interesting because like I've worked in a bunch of different organizations and I've definitely encountered people who are like, hey, like, this team, you're just not great at their job. And when you dig deeper into it, you often find is like actually the leaders weren't great at their job. They weren't great at like setting the vision for where you were going, helping them to understand the mission and how they went about achieving it, giving them the tools they needed in the training. And what's great is like, you go and you talk to the people who are on the front lines, they're talking to customers every day, and they'll tell you exactly what's wrong and how you can fix it. And so I think as a leader, like you have to make sure that you are talking to your customers, that you are talking to, the people who are, engaging with your customers on a daily basis to understand what's happening.
Just a quick word from our sponsor. As a longtime champion of the local startup ecosystem, Silicon Valley Bank supports innovative companies with the solutions and financing they need through every stage of growth. With more than 1,500 bankers and relationship advisors and 40 billion in loans as of Q1 2024, SVB delivers the right people, service, and resources to support your entire financial journey. Learn more at svb.com. Now back to our interview. Let's get into Maven now, which is the startup that we talked about a little bit at the beginning. Um, what you're doing makes a ton of sense, but let's talk about the foundation. How did you meet your co-founders? You talked about them a little bit already, but how did you meet?
Yeah. What's interesting is I've known one of my co-founders for I don't know, probably 12 years at this point. And there was right around the time when I was doing my last startup, there was a big group of folks. A bunch of them were going through like Techstars, like one of the very early classes. A bunch of them were doing, kind of like startups in the Boston area. And so we all came together and we all had an affinity for playing basketball for some reason. And so we all got a chance to like spend a bunch of time together, and we've stayed in touch throughout our careers. And so I don't know if you knew Raj from Localytics, Jordan
Yeah, of
Flegel, Coach Up,
course. Yep.
Jeremy Lubin, who started Draft and Star Street. Is now Underdog. So there's kind of a bunch of folks who are like we're all part of the ecosystems. Yeah, Sultan is leading personalization over at Spotify. So there's a bunch of us who are all like, we're all friends and we all stayed together and we kind of helped each other at various points throughout our careers. And so I knew Eugene through that. He was working with Ziad at Marginalize at that point. And then Sammy he had started a company, sold it to Google, and so ended up meeting him through Ziad and through Eugene. And Sammy and I hit it off right away. And we, the three of us go out and grab dinners and talk about, hey, we want to have the opportunity to work together as we look to the future. And so, as we were looking at this opportunity in front of us for Maven, we said, hey, this is the right one for all of us. It kind of brings together each of our individual areas of expertise around like, product engineering and the go-to-market functions.
All right. So what are you solving with Maven?
Yeah. So what's interesting, Keith, is that, I've worked in a bunch of, these kind of large customer experience organizations who cared very deeply about the experience that you were delivering to customers. And so, as we would continue to grow in like in the HubSpot case, like in a very rapid fashion, we're one of the five fastest growing B2B SaaS companies ever after $1 billion in revenue. It was like, well, how do we continue to deliver that same customer experience, knowing that like we have a lot more customers that we have to deliver that to, and for most go-to-market functions, you know, you have to have a lot more customers that we have to deliver that to, and you know, for most go-to-market functions, you have to have a lot more customers that we have to deliver that to, and you know, for most go-to-market functions, you have to have a lot more customers that we have to deliver that to, and you know, for most go-to-market functions, you It's like very linear in terms of like, you have more customers, you add more people. And at some point you realize, well, this isn't sustainable, right? Like I'm going to have like 7,000 CS people in my organization in the future if I keep doing the same thing. And so Kate Bueker, the CFO at HubSpot, she did a really great job of pushing me to think about how do you create like non-linear growth. And Yamini continued to kind of push that within the company of like, you need to think outside the box, you need to think differently. And so I was looking at different solutions. How do we use like technology in order to provide a better experience? And of course, I kind of went through the different iterations you would normally go through as a CS leader. It's like, okay, well, great. You're getting pressure in terms of, how do you do more with less? Well, let's first start off by saying like, maybe like, we create, move our costs to a lower cost locale. And so we built a big team in Bogota, and it's an amazing group of people down there. Did a great job of working with our customers, but that's a one-time cost savings. And so, once you do that, it's like, okay, great. Next time Kate Bueker comes back in and says, Jonathan, you need to like figure out how you continue to improve here. You're like, oh, okay, well, what do I do next? Well, maybe we can stop serving our smallest customers, all the freemium customers at HubSpot. Let's stop engaging with them. But the challenge is, Keith, is that what happens when you stop engaging with those customers, they stop getting value out of your product. And so you stop helping them to get value out of the product. They don't stick around and they don't keep upgrading and start using more of the product. So that's not a great solution. And then the third thing you do is like, okay, great, let's charge our largest customers money for this. They'll love that. Turns out they don't love that after like 17 years of like getting great service at HubSpot. They're like, that's not the answer. And so as I was chatting with Eugene and Sammy, we said, hey, there is a better way. And it's the emergence of like new technology that's come out. I think there's something magical that we all saw when all of us saw the early versions of Chat GPT. I certainly remember like what my first experience was like. I was blown away, and then I started thinking about the potential for us to be able to create this like amazing personalized experience for end users, being able to instantly answer their questions, helping them to get this personalized experience, and actually like transition from asking questions, dragging mouse around the screen to actually being able to take actions. And so, that was really the impetus for Maven.
Okay, we talked about raising capital already, but I think it's important to note kind of the speed and velocity that you've been building. So you raised your or announced your seed in December, right? So
Right.
like how did you start building the product? Like at what point was this idea, this market, you had so much experience, you have great co-founders. When did you actually start building product? And like did your investors just understand the vision or did they see a product? Like where were you at as far as building at that point?
Yeah, I think the first lines of code were actually written, I think the second week of July. And so I left HubSpot at the end of June, and then we started Maven. And so we started there. So we had raised the seed round. I think we closed it right around the beginning of end of June, beginning of July. And then, I don't know if we ever formally announced it, but we had raised seed money pretty early on. And then we raised an A round, of course, not too long ago. And so,
Yeah.
for us, I think they understood the vision. They believed that we were the team to be able to go out there and to make an impact in that space. And I think it's like a massive opportunity, and we were talking earlier about like the TAM is really important, like going after a narrow niche where you're never going to be a big company, no matter how much of that, like the pieces of it you conquer, or that you bring in that you're able to acquire as a company, and you can never be a big company. And so going after like a sufficiently large problem is really important. And the other thing is like, like the velocity that we moved at, from us, we said, hey, we're not leaving like Google, Stripe, and HubSpot to be able to like go after a small problem or to like, be a small company. We wanted to move fast and we wanted to move at an incredible velocity. Similar to like, we saw the velocity that we were moving at, the different companies we were at. We said, that's what we aspire to be.
Yeah, no, and I think that funding date, I knew, sometimes like Crunchbase has information that
Yeah.
isn't always
Yeah.
100% accurate, so I'm pretty sure I
Yeah.
pulled it from there. But when
Yeah.
when I was looking into your Series A announcement, it talked about some important data points. So enterprises spend $460 billion a year on support. The cost per query number was staggering for me too. It's 40 to $100 cost per query.
Yeah.
So when you like, I would think some people might be naysayers and just be like, oh, this is more like just a sophisticated chat bot, right? Like, but there's so much more than that. So explain how it all works and how you're saving, companies money and all about the
Yeah.
platform.
I think before we get into that, like it's important to differentiate between like what people saw as chatbots in the past and like what we're talking about currently. And so in the past, you had these chatbots and they were like they're kind of dumb, Keith, right? Like they didn't have a brain behind it. It was like, you had something that was very directional in terms of like you say X, we say Y. And it was like pre-programmed. And so, you couldn't deviate from that path or be like, I'm sorry, I can't answer your question. And it was really frustrating for users. And so, there was some like machine learning algorithms that some of the previous generation companies came out with. They were like, hey, we think we can have a massive impact in terms of improving your customer experience. And like they use this word deflecting, customers' inquiries. And so a lot of companies went into that and they were like, hey, this is awesome. We want to deliver a better experience for our customers. And it ended up working for like 5% of their customers. And so they're very disappointed with like the results were previously and maybe a little jaded. And so, when you look at the future and the evolution of technology, Gen AI looks very different from like machine learning and the capabilities around that and, like what it's capable of doing. It's like capabilities around reasoning, of course, using neural networks and all that fun stuff, enable it to do something that's incredibly sophisticated. And, like you look at the benchmarks in terms of like intelligence and capabilities and passing standardized testing, far different from what existed before. And so what we've built is something where we've created these AI agents and they can act autonomously in terms of interacting with your customers using people's data in order for them to be able to like train on it and to answer customers' questions just as you would a human. So you think of the process that you would go through if you were, hiring a support rep at HubSpot. And you would say, hey, welcome to the team. We're excited to have you here. By the way, here's all the information that you need to know about our products. Here's how we want to engage with our customers. Here's the list of instructions of like the tone to use and all this other fun stuff. So we allow people to do a very similar things like, hey, give us the same information you would give a human. And we create these AI agents. And so we create these AI agents. They can work autonomously, or we have a co-pilot solution that can actually just sit there in your platform and help your customers through that process and your agents who are interacting with them. And so, what we do is we say, we want to create a better, faster experience. You think about your experience as a customer. It's like, okay, if I'm in the middle of doing something, I want an instant answer. Like, tell me what it is, and so I can keep doing the thing I'm doing and get value out of the product that I'm using. If it doesn't happen, then you're like, okay, I've moved on to something else. You may never come back to it again. So being able to answer questions instantly is super important. The next thing is like, there's kind of different ways that we like to be served as customers. The first is like, I want to be able to find my own answer, right? And so like, you've had like these knowledge bases that were generated before, like didn't do a great job of like, kind of searching through a bunch of articles and surfacing those to you. And so like, you might have to click on like 10 different articles before you find what you're looking for. That's not great. It didn't work well. So it's like, okay, that's like kind of that self-serve function. That's the way a lot of people like to be served. It wasn't great. Second piece that people really like to focus on is like, okay, well, I want to be able to find information, but like once I find the information, I want to validate that that's actually accurate before I like hit this big red button. And then the third way that people want to be served is like, listen, like this is super important to me. I want to make sure that my Comcast internet is working when I move. I want to talk to someone and make sure that's like turned on and it's going to be there when I like go into the house. And so those are like kind of the three ways that people like to be served. And our approach to that has been is like people need those answers instantly. They need them in a variety of different formats and different mediums to be able to enable those. And so we've created something that very much mirrors the user's needs. So first of all, it's like autonomous chat agents that can answer questions instantly. And you can put that on your website. You can put that in a chat bot. You can put it in your product. And so we have some really great customers who are doing a lot of that. The second is like, hey, I want to make sure that there's verification capabilities. I want you to find the answer, but I want to be able to verify that. And so a great way to be able to do that is to chat or to, have the option to engage with an agent. The third is like, just like give me to an agent, like I want them to tell me exactly what the answer is. And so you think about what really takes a ton of time from a customer support perspective. Once you've like gone through the queue and the support rep gives to you, they're like, I'm going to go back. I'm going to read through all the case history, understand what's going on in the account in order for us to be able to make sure that I can give you a satisfactory answer and a great experience. We summarize all that. We tell them, here's what's been said, here's what's going on in the account. And then even better, like, here's what the answer is. And so the agent has the answer there and they can send that right over to the customer, or they can say, yeah, maybe I'm going to tweak this a little bit, and they have the ability to interact with it. And so we tried to accommodate the different types of user needs as we were thinking about the holistic experience.
And it's impressive. And I keep coming back to like the velocity of what you've been building. So you talked about you started building it about a year ago.
Yeah.
And as part of your funding announcement or, updates to your website, whatever, you're talking about getting early customers and results, TripAdvisor, HubSpot, Impact.com, ClickUp, and they're real use cases like
Yeah.
OpenAI. Like, I mean, it's just fascinating to see what can be built in a relatively short amount of time with the traction you already have. So how is that able to like come together so quickly?
We're really fortunate to have some incredible engineers, Keith. And so, we went out, we started recruiting these like amazing, like top tier engineers from places like Google and Stripe and Amazon, people who had worked with this type of technology before and Meta, and they'd worked with this type of technology before, and so they were able to move incredibly fast. And they're like senior staff level engineers. So if you're not familiar with engineering vernacular, it's like that'd be like 1 out of 100 at Google, right? And so we were able to get this really amazing core foundation of people. I think Sammy, who went to MIT, might have a little bias because I think 80% of them went to MIT as well. But that was really the thing that was helpful for us. And of course, we had these early customers who believed in the vision, what we were trying to do, and were willing to work with us in terms of giving us feedback on what we should be building, how we should be building it. At the end of the day, like going back to that customer first mentality, what we wanted to do is to solve problems, and that was the focus for us.
All right, so you closed your $20 million Series A back in May. So where are things at with the business as far as your go-to-market, the size of the team, or whatever you can
Yeah.
share?
Yeah. And so, at the point when we closed our Series A, we didn't have a go-to-market team. And so, over the past, I think, 2 months, we've gone out, we've hired a head of marketing. We've hired, I think, about 7 sales folks. We actually just recently signed someone who's going to help us on the upside. And so, we've gone from, I think we're about 10, 12 people to almost 27 now. So we've hired very rapidly, and we've been really fortunate, Keith, in terms of like the level of talent that has been interested in working with us. I think we've gotten almost 20,000 resumes from folks who are excited about Maven, our vision, and what we want to do. So now our Trish, who leads our HR function, has been very busy going through those. So if there are any folks who we haven't gotten back to, massive apologies for that. But we're excited about the people that are coming to us.
Yeah, no, it's what you're building. I'm sure as soon as the release came out about the new raise, the Trish got flooded with applicants, which is a good thing. Uh, I would be applying too. So, um, all right. So, what are you looking to build here? What's like fast forward, 5 years, 10 years? What are you looking to do with Maven?
It's interesting because I think the what we want to do is buried in the things that I've done in the past, Keith. It's create a great customer experience. And we believe that, people spend a lot of time in these kind of uh, tasks that aren't requiring like their special expertise. I think when you think about what are humans good at, like they're great at interacting with each other, right? Having conversations like you and I are having, but not like let me memorize a 90-page PDF and like this sentence from this place and like let me make sure that I record that. Like no, like that's not what people are good at. And so what you want to do is say, hey, how do we answer people's questions in an efficient manner as quickly as they need those answers while making sure that we're actually allocating the people on our teams who are amazing at interacting with people and helping them to get a great experience to kind of those people who really need it. I know that I personally my mother would like have no idea what to do, and she's like she just wants to talk to a person. I feel bad for whoever the Verizon support rep is that she talks to like probably every other day. It's like I don't know why my phone won't work, the button's not here, and I need to talk to someone. I don't want this. And there's other people like us who would much rather have like give me the answer right away, and they'll go to like the website. And so I think I want to save those folks who are really amazing at helping people for talking to people like my mom who need that help.
Yeah, totally. And what I envision, so I'm gonna put my fanboy cap on because, like, I'm sure your investors, when you see this team that's come together to build what you're building, immediately saw the product market fit. Like, it was just very odd. I'm like, oh yeah, this is totally needs to exist. The wealth of experience that you have in terms of in this sector, right?
Yeah.
Customer service, customer success. It just all equates to hopefully an pillar anchor company in the Boston tech scene, you know, and I give a world of credit to HubSpot, Brian and Dharmesh for their um, openness to embrace people to go off and build things, right? That started very early on with the HubSpot culture. Instead of you must not leave, there's no better company than a HubSpot. How
Yeah.
could you dare go start your own company? That no, they encourage people. Sometimes they were investors of these companies that have gone off and done amazing, wonderful things. So uh, that immediately saw like, okay, this is a generational defining anchor company in the Boston tech scene. So that's what I'm rooting for.
I really appreciate that, Keith. I think we have a long ways to go before we can get to the point where we can claim that, but there's certainly some folks that have come ahead of us that will learn a ton from HubSpots and some of the other companies there. I know that a lot of the folks that I worked with at HubSpot, and I don't know if you know, Jitu Matani has been amazing at kind of giving me advice, input, and he was at HubSpot very early on, and so I can't speak enough of the folks that I got a chance to work with there and the team that we built there.
All right, so if I am running a startup and I need to build out a customer success function, like what advice would you have as far as when should that come into play? How do you hire for it? How do you evolve
Yeah.
it? How do you use tools like a Maven? Like what's your advice on starting a customer success function from scratch?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? And it's something that I certainly had like a bit of a learning curve when I started the company, Keith, because like I've been in all these great companies, but they were definitely not startups by the time I got there. I think Sprinkler is probably the closest to that, and that was over $100 million in revenue. So, starting Maven, it's like okay, great, like you're hitting the street and you're there, and your 10 closest friends are engineers, and you're like, oh, great, like it's me. I am the go-to-market team. I'm customer success. I'm sales. I'm all that stuff. And so, as we started thinking about like what is the right point for us to be able to bring on, customer success team and that team members, and start investing in software, we said, um, first we got to like have customers, and we had no customers to start with, and so I had to start by selling those. And then as we brought in customers, we said, oh, what's the right way for us to be able to interact with them to make sure they're getting value out of the product, to deliver that white glove service that we really appreciated at the companies we worked at. And so, like starting to understand like what are the processes that we need to go through in order to do that? How do we onboard folks? How do we support them as they're using it? How do we make sure that they're getting the information they need in order to get the most value out of the product? And so it's like we did a little bit of that before actually saying, hey, okay, we're at the point where we need to hire some folks who are probably going to be better at this than we are and to be able to do this full time. And so for us, we went out and we were north of seven figures before we said, let's bring on someone who's going to be able to like focus on this. And so right now we're a team of three people. I think our third person just joined 2 days ago on the CS team. And so what they do is they help our customers as they're going through the onboarding process. They're responsible for working through with them as they're using our technology and then identifying opportunities to continue to gain value out of it.
All right, so you just highlighted, and it's a perfect segue for my next question. The organizations that you've been a part of were much larger. So this is your first time. Well, technically, no. Viera was a startup that you,
Yeah.
but this is your first, I guess. You've got a solid opportunity here to build something of significance. So what have you learned so far as a startup CEO?
The change from running a big team at a large software company to you're responsible for everything. It's certainly one that it can have a little bit of a learning curve. But I think it was the first customer meeting where I was in, where we were talking about the technology that we were building, what we were doing, our approach to it, and they were like, "Wow, this is amazing! This could solve a really big problem for us." I think this is like this thrill that goes through your body of like, okay, like we found this thing and we can build this, we can make this happen. So I think that like that's the first part is like you have to be excited about the mission and what you're doing in order to make that transition. I think if you're executive and you have a big team and you have a big ops team and you're not getting into like kind of the nitty gritty of things and doing a lot of the stuff your own. You have like some amazing folks who are helping you in terms of like generating reports and make sure you have visibility to what's going on in your business, and you have these like multiple levels of managers and directors and VPs who are reporting to you. And so having to go back and do all that stuff again that you did very early on in your career can be challenging for folks. I think for me, it was exciting because it was an opportunity for me to be able to like, I enjoy the process of building. And so these are the components of the building blocks that are required in order for us to continue to like bring our technology and what we want to do to the rest of the world.
All right, so it's very obvious. I have this Boston fanboy hat on. Like I'm a big fan of what Maven's building, but I'm
Yeah.
also really, really, really energized by some companies that have announced funding just literally over the past 2 months, maybe even shorter.
Yeah.
So Day AI, Enfi, 7AI, Suno. So those are four companies that uh, three out of those four companies, all the founders I know and are phenomenal. Like they've either built companies or they had that unique background to build a legit company.
Yeah.
All very practical uses of AI that's deeply needed and embedded. The only company that I didn't know the founding team was Suno, and they raised a massive round of funding to do generative music AI. So what's and I love the story you told about the basketball, connection with Jordan, Jeremy, and Zayad and everybody. Like there's these pockets of people that are collaborating, and I love hearing that. But what's the pulse of the AI community in Boston these days?
And it's really exciting, Keith. And I go to events in San Francisco and I speak at events in New York. And I think Boston is really exciting. I'd love this for us to continue to see more funding events, more companies that are surfacing here, and for us to see kind of more opportunities for interactions here. And so we want to be more involved as a company who has a number of folks here in Boston. And so we're helping to sponsor some AI events locally here in Boston next month on July 17th. So, we want to see as many folks as possible there. And it's really all about the community. It's, how do we foster an environment where people are getting value out of AI and generative AI and the application of it to the specific problems that they're having. So I'm excited to see more people continue to invest in that. I think some of the anchor companies, I'd love for them to continue to invest in the areas around Boston, right? And so, how do we continue to build out that community? I think giving back in an area that's important to this is something that will benefit everyone.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of the uh, you know convergence of healthcare, biotech with
Yep.
AI. I think there's a lot of customers on VentureFizz that have been signing up that are, kind of that sweet spot, which is another amazing advantage for the Boston, overall innovation economy. So there's so much going on. So it's a very exciting, it's almost like you had waves, right? Like now we're seeing
Yep.
the crest of a new wave coming for the Boston tech scene with these hopeful, because back probably when HubSpot was being built, that's when, DraftKings and Wayfair and Klaviyo were all being built into these anchor
Yep.
companies. So hopefully we're in that next phase.
Yeah, I
Um,
think what's interesting is that Boston was traditionally not a kind of focused on consumer, and you're seeing kind of that trend continue. I know Sumo is a little bit more consumer facing, but you're seeing a lot of folks sort of saying, "Hey, there's like real problems that people are experiencing. We have deep expertise in those areas, and we want to use the evolution of technology to do a better job of solving those." And so I think, like Bostonians and maybe be very practical. And so you're seeing the application of that in the business we're building.
Absolutely. All right. So what are three apps you can't live without and you can't use Gmail, Slack, or your calendar?
Mhm. Um, well, I came from HubSpot. And so I think, HubSpot and the CRM is something that it's a business owner. It's like you probably log in and check that on a daily basis. What's going on? What are my customers, how are my customers responding to me? Where are we at from a sales perspective? How are the marketing campaigns going? Those are kind of the first thing that I would say is really important. And I know you said no Gmail. I've been using Superhuman.
Mhm.
So it's a mail app, but it's
That's
not Gmail.
allowed. It's
Okay, all
allowed.
right, good. I like the team is great there. I email Raul, who's the CEO, on a regular basis with some probably unsolicited advice. He's kind enough to respond to me with. And one of them was like, Raul, dude, I need a HubSpot connector if I'm going to use Superhuman, and they were able to produce that pretty quickly. So that was great. Um, and I think, let's see, the other one I think is got to be Spotify. Keith, one of the things that's interesting is as I've like gotten to expend a whole lot more time and energy on work. It's like making sure that I'm finding the time to continue to learn and grow as a leader. And as someone in the the Gen AI space, like the evolution of technology is incredibly rapid, is moving fast. You have to stay on top of it. And so, I've been using Spotify a ton around like podcasts. There's a couple of like ones that I really like Founders, 20VC. I get a ton of information from and really enjoy the stuff that they're doing.
Okay, I'm gonna rant one more time because like anyone that listens to this podcast frequently, when we talk about the three favorite apps, Spotify has been coming up more and more, and I always have to rant because that app is so incredibly useful and it continues to add value. But how I want to take a different approach versus my typical rant is uh Boston deserves all the credit in the world for the personalization for the individual that leads that you brought up. Ziad is in Boston. I mean,
Yes,
and
yes.
like so they acquired the Echo Nest like a long time ago, and what that has done in terms of the evolution for that app to provide so much happiness and value for me, like they just hiked up their subscription for the family plan, I think from 16.99 to 19.99. I'm like,
Yeah,
here, like,
take my
thank you.
money. Yeah.
Like, I have no problem with that price hike. I'm like, I get my kids listen to it, my wife, like the four of us do so much damage to Spotify every month. It's amazing. So, uh, but I'm so proud that the Boston tech scene drives the personalization that keeps getting better and better.
Yeah, completely. I think when you look at what Ziad has done there and kind of the evolution of personalization within, like such a massive app like that, right? What are they at like 350, 400 million subscribers? Everyone has the opportunity to get, their individual feed. They have things that are customized to them. I don't know about you, but I think everyone loves that like end of year thing where you're like, hey, these are the
So
songs you
fun.
listen to the most frequently, right?
Yeah.
And so lots of creative marketing events have come out of this stuff that they've done over at Spotify as well. But yeah, I really enjoy it and get a ton out of it. So massive credit to the personalization team at Ziad.
All right. So you talked about some podcasts that you listen to. Anything that you want to add, or maybe a book recommendation?
Yeah. Any of my previous teams that are listening to this will laugh because there was one book that was like, hey, we start off and like we start reading this book. The Four Disciplines of Execution, I think is really interesting in terms of creating a foundation about how you're going to operate. And so when I went to HubSpot, it was a running joke that there was no meeting that I was in where we didn't talk about leading indicators. And so it's like I sent copies of the book to everyone. I was like, here, read this book. You have to do it. We had the author come in and talk to us about it. But it's really about like, what are the goals that you're setting for yourself? What's happening on a daily basis? How do you set stretch goals? And what are the leading indicators that you need to focus on in terms of like ensuring that you're in line with the expectations to hit those targets? And it's interesting. A lot of this stuff is actually like counterintuitive, where you need to bring your team who are doing the work into the planning process. Doesn't always happen in a lot of organization. A lot of top-down stuff occurs, and it's disconnected from reality. So I think that's one that I would say if you're thinking about, how do I build a business? How do I build an organization? How do I, keep track of what's going on in my company? Four disciplines of execution.
All right. Outside of work, what do you like to do for fun?
I occasionally still get to the gym, Keith. So try to get in some shots every once in a while. So it's still a bit of basketball and try to stay active. Of course, today is the Celtics parade, so excited about that championship. So big sports fan.
Yeah, that was it was amazing run for the Celtics, no doubt.
Yeah,
All right, Jonathan. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to walk us through your background story. Obviously, all the great work you and the team are up to at Maven, and obviously all the great advice.
I appreciate it, Keith. Always a pleasure, and we'll have to do it more frequently.